I also wanted to dig a bit deeper when you said human beings are not made for happiness. Now, it's something that I've kind of educated myself on and been quite interested in the concept that we shouldn't be aiming for happiness, but it's hard on a day-to-day basis when you think I'd like to be a bit more happier right now, but then you kind of rationalize yourself out of it and you say, well, no, because there's these disadvantages. It doesn't necessarily equate to meaning, and you should be enjoying the struggle, and you like pleasure's just a way that you can get controlled, and it's not you're not when you look back on your life, you're not going to appreciate the pleasure. You're going to look at where you suffered. Where do you kind of balance yourself on a day to day between the two? Do you think?
It's a really good question. I mean, it's a really, really good question. And it's not something that can be solved in an hour long podcast, but it's something that we think about and we grapple with for maybe our entire lives. What does it mean to actually be happy? And is aiming for that even what we should be doing? And does that even bring happiness, aiming for it? Or is it some ineffable concept that we try and grasp at, but it's just like grasping at a cloud? Our fingers just fall through. I would say my answer is I look at it from like a evolutionary biology perspective. Right? What is our psychological machinery built for? And the answer to that is not happiness. The answer to that is survival and reproduction, if you look at it from that perspective. Our brain wants us to be taking on challenge and surviving through it and pushing ourselves to acquire resources and then achieve a level of status, to then be at the top of the hierarchy socially, to have access to mates and more resources. And they're the two kind of metrics that our minds are focused on. Happiness is not really what it's looking for. Happiness is maybe a byproduct when you see yourself moving towards one or both of those things. And that's a good thing to understand. There's a quote from, I'm afraid the person's name eludes me at the moment, but the quote is something like, your brain isn't wired to be happy. Your brain is wired for you to try really hard. And that's a nice way of framing it. And so where should we put our aims? Well, aim for something worthwhile, I think, and then happiness comes as a byproduct of you seeing yourself moving towards that worthwhile aim. That's maybe my best definition right now. The other part of it is something that is actually one of your quotes that I still think about. Is you said, what we want is we want depth in the present moment. That's the kind of everyday happiness that you can achieve, I think. It's not the kind of happiness of like when you make it in whatever thing you've been striving for years. It's the kind of happiness that you can have when you sip a cup of coffee on a morning, or you play one of your favorite songs at the end of the day to go to sleep at night, or you go for a drive with a friend and you have a great conversation and you see the countryside and the rolling hills around you and you really connect with that experience. You are one with the fabric of your reality. That's the kind of everyday happiness you can find. That's not going to be a great rush. It's not going to be like the dopamine hit when you see that you've gained X number of followers, or you've got a promotion at work, or you've bought yourself a new piece of equipment because of the work that you've put in, whatever. It's a subtle happiness, but it's maybe a contentment is the right word to use. So to summarize, what I'd say is strive for something worthwhile, because that will improve your life and it will improve the way you interact with the world and the person you become. And as a byproduct of that pursuit, I think you find happiness along the way. Or maybe meaning is a better way of thinking about that kind of happiness. And the second point is be mindful enough to connect with the present moment on a deep level. And that brings a level of contentment that I think people will benefit from having more of.
Well, Peterson said it's a nice byproduct,
Mm, mm,
and that's kind of where it should be experienced. So I also found this quite interesting. I remember about a month ago, uh, my friend Albin, who's the main person I hang out with at uni, he said that you're more happy than most of my friends on a daily basis. And I thought that was interesting because me and Happy don't really, are not like, I'm not like normally the happiest, most energetic person in the room necessarily. But that, but so in the context, like, uh, he him and his friends kind of go out and stuff quite a lot, and it's kind of what we said before. I think of they sacrifice the happiness of the night. No, they sacrifice the happiness. They steal happiness from the next day to have it on that night. And so what I kind of thought about it was that because my baseline is always very steady, and it and therefore there's a more kind of dopamine spiky, and that kind of just suggests that the pleasure just doesn't last, and therefore like um their baseline, like mine just kind of runs on the little bits of fulfillment that I can take. Therefore, like maybe I'm not necessarily the happiest person, but I am fulfilled, and then
Mm.
that's kind of what showed. That's what I think he could see.
But what I gather from that is you have stuff to do. And so you might not be experiencing like exhilaration of going to a nightclub if that's what you want to do or whatever, right? You're not experiencing like a huge level of arousal every so often like they do when they go out. And like not using arousal in any sexual term there. I mean just like physiological stimulation, like dopamine hit, going out drinking, all that kind of stuff like people do. You have like tasks to complete that mean something to you, right? And you there's a level of faith in that that you hope that doing these tasks on a daily basis, even though they can be mundane and not necessarily exhilarating, they're leading to something that is fundamentally good, a better future. So that will give some kind of nice baseline level of contentment of like if you do those tasks and they're not horrific, then you're building something better for the future. Whereas the more immediate gratification pathways to feeling good feel great in the moment, but you're sacrificing that hope for what the future could be. No one's built a better life for themselves going out and drinking. There's a time and a place for it. It's fun with your friends, and you're able to relax and let your hair down and listen to good tunes and put yourself in a different state of consciousness. Like, fair enough. You got the free will and the agency to do that. But you can't say that it's going to benefit you in 5 years' time. And that's something that I think we should focus on. Not completely, not wholeheartedly, like that's all you think about, but bargaining with your future self and giving him the opportunity to be in a better position is a good thing. So that's probably why I would say that's the case. And I think that's why you always need a balance point. You can't just be the guy that sacrifices now for later, because now needs to still be somewhat enjoyable. But you also can't be the guy that just prioritizes the now, because where are those people at 30, 40, 50? They're the people you see that are sort of overweight and still lost in bad habits and seem like they're not really engaged in the social environment around them, and they just look like they're lost souls, and it hurts me when I see people like that.
I think what kind of happens is from when that period ends, they kind of grapple onto the memories, and to that kind of what keeps them going is remember when this happened. And when my life was quite vastly different around sort of 17, 18, that's all you'd kind of talk about is like past memories. And so it instead in the ship analogy, you're not focused on what's coming, what's what you're going to be next. It's more where you have been and what has happened.
Mm, yeah, yeah. I mean that's it, and I think it's I think it's a useful frame in this to think about the idea of an anti-role model. Like you go and see people and you interact with people, strangers, friends, just, acquaintances, whatever, that are later down the line than you in life, in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, whatever. And you're not taking this from like a value judgment way. You're just looking at where they're at and what's led them there and whether you want that or not. And I think that's a really useful evaluation to do. And see, okay, well, they did this thing when they were younger. They prioritized the now over the later. And this is a reality that they created through doing that. Is that something I necessarily want? Well, the answer is no, then change your behavior. If the answer is you're fine with it, then that's fine. Keep doing what you're doing.
There's definitely very little awareness of the importance of the decisions that we make at this age to how they're going to impact the trajectory of our life.
Mm. Yeah, every decision. It's very interesting, and that's another thing that I heard Jimmy Carr talking about. This is only relevant because I've heard, I was listening to a podcast of him going to sleep last night, but him saying that that's a fundamental religious principle as well, prioritizing the later down the line, the future. Right? That's what living a moral life is now. That living a moral life now means that you have eternal life in the afterlife, in heaven or wherever. That's the same principle. It's prioritizing later down the line. It's a principle that is the foundation of many religious perspectives, which is very interesting. So it's something that human culture has held on to for a while, and it's actually, there are theories that say that's one of the main things that makes us human beings and makes us so complex and interesting, is that we are aware of the future and we can bargain with it, which is something that other animals don't seem to have. So
It's the marshmallow experiment. I'm not very well versed in it, but I'm going to give it a go. There were there were a couple kids who had the option to have a marshmallow now or to have, I'm guessing, more marshmallows if they didn't eat one now.
mm,
And the ones that chose the marshmallow now, they, what was it, less wealth or less happiness or something
I
later
think
down the line.
I think they tracked so many outcomes. I think they tracked wealth, but they also tracked general well-being in life. Where they lived, what kind of assets they had, whether they were in a long-term relationship. And then they saw that the kids who could delay the gratification and wait and get the extra marshmallow. It was only one extra marshmallow, by the way. It wasn't like loads. It was like, don't have this one and you'll get two in a bit. Those that waited had significantly better outcomes later in life. I mean, it's those kind of things, mate. That I think the most people would be aware of that study, or if they're not aware, they can sort of understand its concept quite easily. And we just sometimes we hear things like that and we just breeze past them. Oh, that's an interesting finding. No. Take a moment and actually breathe that in. Like, make sure every cell of your body is aware of that outcome, because it means something very significant. It means if you can delay a level of gratification, your life becomes better. Well, that's a very, very important statement to try and understand.
Was is what I'm willing to bet on. Uh, that if I don't go out twice a week for every year of my uni degree, then due to the marshmallow experiment, hopefully I'll be in a good place in the next couple of decades.
Mm.
And I mean, like, it, if, there's, if that's my, like, that's one of my philosophies for kind of what I do and what I do, and like that it means that when you start something when you're sort of 18, when you start like a side hustle, like the first years are not going to be happy because you have your value in the world is like close to zero.
Mm.
So it's very tough when maybe, I don't know what percentage of kids go out, but or live that sort of philosophy. But if you're in the minute philosophy and you see everyone in uni doing one thing, um, and you're there kind of building your hustles, like that's what you gotta get over. You gotta be the exception to live an exceptional life, I guess.
Well, the important point to make is, I know that I specifically come from a level of huge bias in that kind of life and those kind of things have never really resonated with me. Even before I was a weird nerd that sort of like talks on a podcast about stuff. Even when I was 17, 18, like it didn't grip me. I isn't into that. And if that is something you're into, then great, right? Do it as much as you like. But the important thing is you have to be conscious of the weight of that on how your life will develop as time goes by. And it's like, okay, well, what do you actually want? If you want to create everlasting memories and throw yourself into that experience while you're young, do it. but be aware that it means you'll sacrifice other things later down the line. As long as it's all done intentionally, it was excellent. It's excellent. But if you also want to be like in a reasonably stable position 10 years down the line, then go out once a month rather than 3 times a week. Or, find that own balance for yourself, because neither extreme is right. Somewhere in the middle, isn't it? And that's down to you as an individual. And that's the great thing about life, is that we have the free will and agency to decide that. If you want to go to uni and go out drinking every night, you can. If you want to go to uni and get a first and grind every evening in the library, you can. If you want to be somewhere in the middle of that, you can. But don't wish for the opposite outcome when you get the outcome that your actions created. Then you're fine.
Yeah, those are the kids that looked at you with your 3A stars and wanted the result.
Well, look, like that's the thing. I'm like, well, guys, you have a lot more, like, I don't know, fun than me in that level. I'm just not really interested in the party scene. I'm just some like weird guy that's interested in psychology, and I had my sport obligations that I had to stick to, and my life's just different, and that's fine. Difference is good, guys. If everyone was like me, that'd be shit. If everyone was like you, that'd be shit. It's great that me and you both exist together, and we can have a conversation and live a different kind of life. We should celebrate that. I think the issue is it comes with value judgment. If I say the fact that I don't really do that kind of stuff, then people think that's reflecting my value judgment on them, and that's not the case. I genuinely believe that the great thing about being a human in this day and age is that you can choose how you spend your time. What I'm saying is that there's consequences to that, and you should be aware of them. And that's as long as you're aware of the consequences, go and do what the hell you want. It's great.
What was your first point?
Yeah, so I like this. I like when I have an idea that I'm actually proper interested in the moment, and I can come on a podcast and just flesh it out and get your opinions on it, and we can sort of branch off different ideas from it. But I've been reading this book that's right next to me that you may have heard of. It's called The Courage to be Disliked, right? And it's a book about. So you've obviously heard of Freud and Jung. They were two massive figures that sort of in the emergence of psychoanalysis in the early 20th century. But there was a third guy that was kind of not as charismatic as Freud and Jung, called Adler. And this book is basically a synthesis of Adlerian psychology by two, I think they're Japanese writers. And it's massive. It was huge in Asia, but it's sort of come into Europe and America in like the past year or so, and it's big. But essentially, there are a couple of principles in this book that have resonated with me a lot. The main one is that they summarize Adlerian psychology as the psychology of courage. And it has the underpinning philosophy that a lot of our problems in life, a lot of things that we wish to improve and obstacles we wish to navigate can be done with a sense of courage. Like, courage is the superpower that if you can develop it, you can grow and exceed in all areas of your life, whether that be in your interpersonal relationships or the thing you're trying to strive for, or in your mental health. If you have a level of courage, it can allow you to do that more easily. And I wrote a post about this. I don't know if you saw it, about the importance of courage. Quite a simple one, quite succinct. But I basically said, like, it's a character trait that unlocks all the areas of your life. Because what is confidence? Well, confidence is just courage in another form. What do you need to pursue meaningful work rather than just staying in the secure, safe path you're on? Well, you need courage to be different, right? What do you need to grow in a hobby or learn a skill? Well, you need courage, right? To be able to stick to a plan for somewhere you want to go, maintain the habits that you've intended for yourself, what do you need? You need courage. You need courage to reinvent yourself and be a different person. You need courage to create that new friendship with a stranger, to ask that girl out. You need courage to be grateful that you're alive, despite the fact that the world is full of suffering and evil and things that go wrong, right? In spite of that, it takes courage to be grateful to be alive. You need courage to be loved, to be happy, and to have a positive impact in the world and to find meaning. And so I think framing your life in this way can be really useful. And I'll pause there for a sec and see if you've got any thoughts.
Yeah, what comes to mind is Aristotle's virtue ethics, and because it was one of his main philosophies, and he never named specifically what a virtue was, but he did point out courage as one of the main ones, and it's interesting how you link that to something that can apply to lots of different skills. I'm interested why the book's called "The Courage to Be Disliked." Why, uh, like, is that an aim?
So, so Adler's point of view was that all problems in life are interpersonal relationship problems. So all your problems come from the way you evaluate and exist within your interpersonal relationships. So anxiety is the fear that you may be ridiculed and embarrassed and be seen as a failure in your interpersonal relationships. Or low self-esteem is your awareness that in your interpersonal relationships you are the inferior in whatever domain or metric you're looking at. And his
What
argument is that if no one else existed, a lot of our mental afflictions that we go through as humans wouldn't exist. If we were just on
what do
our
you
own
mean
in the
by
world, go on,
what do you mean by interpersonal relationships?
all your relationships you have with other people, strangers, acquaintances, friends, family, lovers, everything under the sun. That's like interpersonal relationships is like a whole term just to describe that. Your engagements with other people. And he said that if you had none, if you were in the world on your own, a lot of the mental afflictions we go through as a human race wouldn't happen. It's a very interesting theory. Now, is it 100% true? Are there interpretations that disagree with it? Of course, but that's why it's the courage to be disliked. Because he basically goes, if you have the courage to live the life you'd like to live in the way you'd like to live it, then you're going to upset people. People are going to dislike you. But if you have the courage to bear that, then on the other side of that is a meaningful life, which is a very good lesson to take away from it.
So, what's the strategy around what you should do if you're interpersonal relationships?
He kind of talks about principles of not seeing life as a competition. Because as soon as you see life as a competition, you're either inferior or superior to somebody else. And they both lead to psychological traits that aren't healthy, right? Either the low self-esteem or the narcissistic delusion. Seeing life as a competition with other people is not good for your mental health at all. I think it's a good theory. It's kind of like the Peterson compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not who someone else is today. It's that kind of thing.
Me versus you.
Yeah, exactly. And that because people have such a unique life experience to you, you are going to be different to them in different domains. It doesn't represent a fundamental value judgment about you versus them in the world. We're different but equal. Our value as individuals is equal. Where we came from when we were born and where we go when we die are the same place. But in this world, we're different. We have different levels of skills and different abilities and different levels of IQ or ability to throw a ball or social skills or math skills or the ability to write or there are so many differences between people, but our fundamental value as a person is the same. And so viewing it as a competition is it's a human ego created situation because you want to have that feeling of dominance and social status. But he basically says even if you win, is a recipe for not feeling optimal.
Yeah, yes. I don't know who it was, but I heard someone say, "How is other people?" And like it strikes as a bit of an outlandish sentence, but maybe there's some truth in it. And I like what you said about the scale of, due to the scale of competition, you're either always gonna feel like you're not good enough because you're submissive to the guys ahead of you, or you're gonna be narcissistic and trying to rub it in the face of the people below you. So
Mm.
it's a lose lose.
Mm. And also, what an adversarial way to approach the world. Not nice. What he says in the book is if your life is a competition with other people, then everyone has the potential to be your enemy. And you shouldn't want enemies. You want friends. You want to make friends with the world. And so if you're in competition with someone, they're not really your friend, are you? You're not. If you think about a definition of what a true friend is, you're not in competition with them. Like me and you are not in competition with one another. We collaborate, but we're on our own lanes. You know, we have different skill sets, we have different experiences, we have different character traits, and that's good. that means we can come together and collaborate and create good shit. But we're not evaluating each other on different metrics and comparing results in competition. Our dynamic would fundamentally not work if we did that.
But I feel like the way the world is in Western culture, men are competing against each other for the best woman, for the best car,
If
and
that's the game you want to play, you can play that game. That game exists. But isn't there a world where you can compete with your past self and still get the things you want and not see everyone as your enemy?
yes, I actually heard something quite interesting. Tate said this. He said the happiest man in the world is the man that wants nothing. The second happiest man in the world is the man who's got everything.
Mm-hmm.
But that's interesting. How wanting nothing is better than having everything.
Mm. But that's what I've said to you before is a nice definition of happiness. When you don't want to be anywhere else as anyone else doing anything else. Nothing more, nothing less. That's happiness. You want to be where you are now. Happiness is where you want what you already have. I think when you read books like this, they give you a theory on a frame or a lens of looking at the world. That doesn't have to be the lens that you see everything through, but it makes you think, and I think that's important. Something that makes you think, gives you a different perspective. I've never thought about the idea that all problems are created from the way how we are in the social network. But if you break it down and think about it a little bit, it makes sense. You wouldn't worry about what you said or did because who's going to evaluate it? Only you. And your conscience is kind of a psychological representation of what the collective social world may think if you do or say a certain thing. It's just in your own brain, but maybe it is a manifestation of what your mind thinks the social world will evaluate you by. Why
If
did our conscience emerge? So we didn't do immoral things so that we could fit in the social world. Maybe I'm just playing with ideas, but
if the game that people are playing is who has the best car, the best woman in this narcissistic, uh, um, this sort of scale that we just discussed. What's a better game to play?
the best game to play is who are you and what do you want, right? If you're pursuing the car just so your work colleagues see the car you drive and are impressed by it, that's a shallow aim. That's going to lead to dissatisfaction at the end of the day. If you want the car because you like the feeling of driving it, right? Then go for it. Go and pursue it, man. Like that's something you want. But I think the game you should play is the game that isn't captured by your human ego, not something you're attached to, not something that you want to beat other people with the accomplishment of. What would you do if nobody cared or watched it? You know, I think that's why I enjoy doing shit like this. That's why every day I write about stuff that no one's going to see maybe for years or maybe ever, right? Why do I do it? Because it's something I want to do. If I spoke on the podcast just because I wanted people to listen to it, I would have got bored by now.
There's a there's a privilege to be able to play a game as well, because uh, Peterson and Human talked about this, and they also talked about the book that you just mentioned. So I'm like loosely familiar with the concepts of it, and it does sound very interesting. So it was interesting. Peterson said that he was having like a hard time defining good because it's easier to define evil than it is to define good. And then he said it took him a long time to work it out, but what is the opposite of tyranny?
Mm-hmm.
And that's play,
Mm,
the ability to play.
mm,
And so this is such a privilege that not only can you play with the world and have the freedom to do that, but also play in some sort of adventure that sustains yourself and keeps you going on the challenge.
Yeah, I mean, play's so interesting because it's only a state you can tap into when all other primary motivations have been satiated. You can't be in a playful state when you're hungry or thirsty or you're so in need of sleep and rest or the forces of nature are stopping, you don't have any shelter and you're caught in a storm or there's a predator around you and you're in a state of danger. You can't play in those situations, but play is what emerges when all those foundational needs are met. And it's the state of optimal human experience, I think. And and think about it this way, I think it's so important that we keep that in mind. Whenever I get stressed about basketball or I've played shit in a game, or like a training session didn't go how I wanted it to go, or some other player doesn't rate me, or like all of this, and you get caught up in the minor details and all the bullshit of it. I have to remind myself, Joel, this is a game that you've chose to play. Like this is just a sport, it's just a game. Like that's one of the fundamental like hinge points of my conversation with my sports psychologist is reminding me that you should approach it as a state of play because it's a game. It's a game you play. It's people trying to throw a ball in a hole. It's not life or death. And every time it becomes this kind of psychological stressor, it's always because my human ego is attached to some sort of outcome. And so we can view everything through that. Me and you have decided to make a podcast. Why? Because we wanted to play with ideas. We wanted to have interesting conversations with people. And when we maintain that perspective and don't get too bogged down on results or what guests we got on or how many views it got, or how many listens it got, that's when we're unstoppable, Jacob. Because no one's opinion and no outcome can stop our motivation because we just want to play the game.
Yeah, don't hold on too tightly to the outcome of the play.
Mm.
It's something that doesn't really have an outcome,
No,
or it shouldn't.
no. Because
You don't know
play,
how the game of chess is going to go before you start playing.
no, and that's what an adventure is, right? You play a game and you don't know the outcome, but you enjoy the playing of the game. And in the purpose of the game is just to keep playing, enjoying it. That's what a beautiful way to view life.
He also said, in the kind of adventure thing, he said that things like video games and pornography, they're like false adventures. It
Mm,
gives you everything an adventure has, but you're not actually out there, like out in the real world, experiencing it. It's
mm.
like it's this virtual kind of false adventure.
Yeah, it's not real. It's not real. It's dark, man. It's dark. No, I think that those things are so effective because they capture something that's so deep in you. That drive to be a hero from the video game perspective, and that drive to be sexually gratified in all number of ways under the sun, as dark as you want to go. You can access that like immediate, just a search. And the video game thing, you can go, buy. Pretty much every kid now has a console, and they can go buy a game from a store and play that and simulate being a hero. And then when you can access that stuff so easily, how does that affect your motivation towards doing it in the real world? And so I think it's going to be interesting when our generation and the generation below us, age-wise, come into adulthood. Like, I wonder if we're going to see, because what's interesting, Jacob, is we're like the first generation that had technology so prominent in our lives from like age of 10. And it's like, what are going to be the differences when we're the 40-year-olds or the 50-year-olds? And how are people's lives going to evolve as a consequence of this? Because it's not nothing. It's not something you can just breeze past.
Well, we've had the chance to experience real adventure without knowing difference. The iPad kids, well, they probably know it's false adventure, and
Mm,
it brings me back to maybe a better answer to last week when we spoke about the study of the machine that could give you everything that you wanted. The reason why people didn't want to pursue that machine is because it doesn't give them adventure. It's
mm,
not, and there's the direct link between something being real and being able to be an adventure.
Mm, yeah. It's such an interesting study, that, because it suggests that you want an element of reality in everything you do. It's so interesting. It's like something only feels optimally meaningful if it's real, if you earned it. If you went out there, you were the ship that was in the harbor, but you ventured out into the unknown, into the danger, and that's what makes everything worthwhile, when it's real. And it kind of links to my other point that I wanted to discuss, if you don't mind if I go into it. I've been thinking about Joseph Campbell's model of the hero's journey, and I actually read up a little bit on it. And it really, like I said before we started recording, it's really consolidated my knowledge and ideas around what we mean by a myth and what we mean by an archetype, and then linking that into Joseph Campbell's hero's journey myth. And so I'll go into it, and then if you want me to pause at different points, just jump in, or I'll pause to hear what you think. But essentially, the paper said that what a myth is a story that encapsulates an aspect of the human experience so deeply that it can outlive whole societies and whole generations, and is eternally relevant and eternally resonates with the human psyche. No matter how our culture changes, it's something that still sits right with us. And these are things we know and recognize without having to be taught them, right? They are narratives that act as metaphors that kind of represent the capabilities of human potential and human life. They're a truth beyond words or images. They're truth that isn't context specific to that world that we live in, or that culture. They are true beyond all of that. And that's why they have to be put through a story, because they can't really be explained through words. They have to be acted out, right? The hero myth is. It's a story that can be applied to many different domains, right? And basically, what an archetype is, then, it's like a psychological representation of a mythological way of being. But that's a lot of like words, and I get that. So what do I mean? It's a way we can mentally represent ways of living life that have worked across time and are fundamentally good. And I think these are intrinsic, right? You don't learn them through experience. They're kind of in your mind. And that's why as a kid you love watching Disney films and shit like that, because Disney films are they're like animated, colorful, musical manifestations of mythological stories. Now that sounds wild, but that's what they are. That's why you can be 4 years old and watch Beauty and the Beast and be absolutely gripped by it. Like, you don't have an idea of what's really going on, but there's something about the narrative that grips you. And so that might sound like a bunch of waffle, but what that led me to think is like, let me talk about the hero myth before I go into sort of applications to life. So going from that, then what the paper said was, Joseph Campbell's idea of the hero myth, he called the hero myth the monomyth, which basically means it's the overall story of human existence. There can be different kind of versions of it, but it's the overall amalgamation of all of those narratives. It is the mythological representation of what it means to be human. And it had a couple of key features. And that's the going into the unknown, facing challenge, and coming back with wisdom and having transformed. They're like the 3 key stages. And that's what being a human is. You're born into the unknown world. You're a baby. You have no idea what's going on around here. You have no idea what other people are or objects are or what you're supposed to be doing. And you travel into that unknown. You exist. You have to live. And through that, you take on challenges and navigate obstacles. And then you learn things and you grow and you transform and you become an individual. And that's how human life works. Now, that might have been slightly incoherent, probably because my knowledge on it isn't excellent. But I find it so fascinating, mate. I find it so fascinating because it literally gives us a framework of like, if you don't know what to do with your life, try and do this. You can apply that principle of call to adventure, enter the unknown, face challenges, accrue wisdom, and transform. That can be applied to anything, into sport, into relationships, into work, into that is it's a narrative that you can live out. You can be that hero. And one final point I'll say before we go into interpretations and branch off is that courage, right? Courage is the elixir the fuel that you need to live out this life, to venture into the unknown, to be the hero, you need courage. It's a fundamental character trait of all heroes throughout stories and movies and comic books and everything that we consume. The hero has courage. And so that's where I'll leave it.
How should we actually I'll ask this one first? So if the aim that's built into us is to try and be a hero, is there any other archetypes that we should also try and be like? Is this the other archetypes going to be a state of being like, for example, the jester, the fool, the wise king? Are
Mm,
these other kind of modes of experiences that are also we should try and experience?
I think so. I think I think it's true. I think they are. So take the fool for example. When you try something new, let's say on the hero's journey, right? This is why the hero's journey is like the amalgamation of all the symbolic narratives that make up like ways that you can exist in the world that are good and that are beneficial. To enter into the unknown, you have to be a fool. You have to sort of adopt that narrative that you are going to look like an idiot in order to transform later down the line. You have to start out when you try something new of being shit and then eventually improving. Or think about it, like some great archetypes come around like parenting, right? We all kind of have a narrative in our mind of what the divine mother figure looks like, right? That's shown in so many artworks and films and old stories of the nurturing mother, or the divine father, right? These are characters. These are how do I put this? These are ways of being that we recognize without being taught them intellectually. Like you can recognize what good nurturing parenting looks like, and that's because the person is acting out some kind of archetype, a nurturing mother or father archetype. And so yeah, there are there are stories we're told that we should act out to live good lives, and that's what a myth is. That's why myths last across time, because they are relevant no matter what the context is.
And you said a myth is this timeless story. What should how should we integrate myths into our lives? Like all these kind of timeless stories of St. George and the Dragon. Uh, I don't know if I can think of any more on the top of my head, but
Harry
yeah,
Potter's the
what's
same thing. The story of Jesus Christ is the same thing. Even look at like Shrek. Shrek's the same thing. It's the same story. The call to adventure, the challenge, and then returning with new wisdom. Like it's the same
on,
thing.
on rescuing the princess?
Yeah, exactly. Well, to answer your question, something that was in the paper that really fascinated me was the difference between the myth and a story is that stories are just told. Myths are supposed to be experienced. They're supposed to be acted out. Right? I like that a lot. And so to answer your question of how we apply it to our lives, when we find a story really gripping, right? Like when you watch Harry Potter, that you'll sit through seven like 2.5 hour long films about a wizarding world that doesn't actually objectively exist. The reason you're gripped by that is in some way, I think, you're watching what your life could be. Right? You're not going to be able to cast spells through a wand and take down Voldemort, but you're watching mythological ways of being represented to you. And so that resonates because that's something that you want to live out that life, right? And so what I would say is people should research the hero's journey. I think is just a concept, is because I think it's brilliant, and you can adopt the principles into your life. There will be a call to adventure at some point. I talked about this in the video I made, but it's very specific to your life. So it could be you move to university, to a new city you've never been before. You start a new job, or you try and pick up a new skill, or you meet a new person. These are all calls to adventure, and they're always placing a choice in front of you, whether you'd like to move forward into it or recede back out of fear and uncertainty. And there are always going to be challenges that you could take on that could push you. That could be the new project at work, or trying to develop a relationship with that person, or trying to get better at a skill and get to a certain level. These are all the challenges and trials and tribulations that come with that. And then returning with new wisdom and going through personal transformation happens as a consequence of pushing yourself into that unknown and taking on those challenges. And what I love about the concept is that it's a cycle. You know, you return and feel comfortable, then you go back out into the unknown. It's like something we talked about at the beginning of this conversation about the every 18 months or 24 months you should feel a level of imposter syndrome. You should go out into the unknown. The ship should venture forth from the harbor. It's true. There's something deep in us, I think, that craves that. And that's why the hero's journey story or narrative is so gripping, because it represents how you should live your life.
That is a really good definition. It's a mode that should be experienced. It's like in Robin Hood, aim for we are supposed to do good and confront the corruption, and then through the kind of the taking from the rich, we then give back to the poor, i.e., help our families and things like that.
Yeah.
That should be experienced.
Yeah, and look, there are two perspectives on this. There are the cynical types that will go, "What is bro yapping about? You know, bro has a degree in yapology. Bro's just chatting shit, right? Just live your life, wake up, and don't think about it too much, right?" But I think for some people, in the way their minds are wired, having a sophisticated lens to view your life is so useful. Like, you can wake up and confront the chaotic potential of the day and see your challenges as dragons to slay and become a more balanced, valuable, integrated human through doing that. And just as I'm talking about that as a way of life, I feel excited. I feel enthusiastic about my life. And that's one thing. I think this is why, on a general point, I'm so fascinated in psychology and philosophy and spirituality and religion, because as humans, we can decide how we view and experience our life. And if you want to create, you know, the normal way of looking at it and say that what I'm saying is yap and just get on with it, like, that's fine. But I think there is a way we can look at our worlds where we are a hero. You can create a story. You can do it. And that's so beautiful, I think. And why not do that? Why not try and be a hero, be the people you admire, be remarkable out in the world? Because I think on the other side of that is peak experience.
I think this is what the Bible does very well, and it's the levels of integration in human life. Um, it's hyper real,
Mm,
and uh, I guess we can look at the story of Abraham and kind of say to ourselves, there will be a time where you get comfortable, where you have everything you want, but then there'll be this, another call to adventure, and that's kind of God's um, way for you to be a blessing to yourself and others.
mm,
So that's a story about the story of Abraham. To my understanding, is an old man who has had everything he wanted, um, like very comfortable and um, rich and things like that. And then when he gets quite old, about 70, he has a call to adventure from God, and then
mm,
he accomplishes that and he helps all the people around him.
mm. Well, I think this might be a stretch, and I might get pushed here to a point where I come to a dead end, but it's something I've been thinking about that I'll just try. I think the reason I think the reason religion is so beautiful at its core and it's lasted so long across time, and why it's so dangerous is an extreme word, but it's so concerning that it's dying out in our culture, the culture that me and you exist in, is because religion is a mythological representation of ways of being that are good. It gives you a life path based on what's good for your psychology, I think. And let me give you an example of this that's based on some ideas I picked up from Peterson and based on some ideas I picked up in my degree. But we were told, literally day one of my degree, that the brain is an approach and avoid system, right? It has two modes, approach and avoid. go forward, recede back, right? Fight, flight, okay? The approach system is very much associated with positive emotion, right? Keep moving, enthusiasm, happiness, pleasure, keep getting that thing, keep moving forward, keep going. The avoid system is very much associated with negative emotion, anxiety, fear, depression, right? Receding into yourself, going away from the threat, away from the danger, right? And what is in religion, right, the divine, the supernatural, represented as? Well, in a lot of cases, this is something Peterson talked about, it's represented as conscience, right, and call to adventure. Now, what are those two things? Avoid and approach, right? Maybe the ways that the divine have been represented in religious stories are just mythological representations of human psyche, right? Approach, call to adventure, positive emotion, conscience, avoid, negative emotion, and the balance between those two. To stay away from the negative emotion, right, through doing good things and keeping your conscience in check and following the positive emotion, following a call to adventure. And that's why God is seen as like the judge, but also the nurturing like father figure. And what do you think about that? I mean, that kind of clicked in my head one day, and I was like, well, yeah, that makes sense. It's
I
like
think
people go on.
suffering as well.
Yeah, well, suffering is part of that avoid system. Suffering is an indicator
Well, or
of
you can
avoid
approach
something.
it. You can.
Well, yeah, that's true as well. Maybe you can kind of alchemize it, right, and go from an avoid state to an approach state with something that makes you suffer.
Suffering comes in, and you choose which way it wants to go in your brain.
Mm.
And so say you approach, you continually approach things in your brain. Is there kind of some kind of reward or some kind of tolerance that gets better, like through kind of repeated exposure?
Well, it's kind of like we said at the beginning of the conversation about you're happy by pursuit, approaching, moving towards, right, growing, chasing something, right, something worthwhile, something meaningful. And maybe that's the same thing then. Maybe through approaching something worthwhile, you get the benefits of positive emotion, the benefits of increased motivation, the benefits to your sense of self. You become a more integrated, valuable individual, and that's the framework that religion outlines. Do that. Aim for something positive, and that's what maybe that's the idea of what Christ or God is. They are the ultimate higher aim. Pursue that.
Yeah, and there's something I quite like as well is if you don't worship something, then you're worshipping yourself. And so, how you can apply that is when you achieve something, it's not then engraved and part of your identity always. It's you did it with God's help, and
Mm,
it's nothing.
mm,
And so, like, they're kind of, and then the cycle of adventure goes round again, and that's I think that's how you keep. That's a nice way of being through the cycles of adventure.
mm, mm. Yeah, man. I mean, it's kind of this is the kind of stuff that is just on the like limit of my ability to explain. But so it might have been some incoherence in this, but it's good for me to try and like force this out and have this conversation because you only consolidate things you've learned by trying to teach them and explain them to other people. And I think there's something deep going on here.
Yeah, it's interesting the avoid and approach thing. It's like every kind of encounter, we have two decisions in our brain to avoid it or approach it, and then you decide to approach things more often, and then that's how you get good at that. And you're that type of person that approaches something every day, but maybe avoids other things, and that's kind of the sacrifice.
Mm, mm.
Um,
And
yeah, I
that
think it's a
well,
pattern.
and that decision is something you have in any part of your day. You know, there will be challenges in front of you, whether you like it or not. Because if you try and avoid all challenge, then you'll be hit with something at some point. some sort of like personal problem, or even through the absence of trying to approach your life in a positive way, you'll start having mental health difficulties, and you have to be a person in the social world. You have to pursue some kind of activity. You have to earn a living in this world. Like, you have to do stuff, and through doing stuff, you're going to face challenges. And so, are you going to approach them, or are you going to avoid them? That's your choice.
Why would there like need to be a kind of an avoid system? Because surely like approaching would be best in kind of every scenario, unless we're kind of talking about prioritization and things like that.
Well, maybe the avoid system. The avoid system is the conscience. So it stops you avoiding you pushing the line too much, or let's say you act a certain way in the world, and the world gives you a bit of feedback from that that was not good, right? Then your conscience will recognize that, and it will become something you then avoid in the future. Something you say, something you do, because we're always receiving feedback from the world on an unconscious level anyway. So the avoid system is for the ways that you don't want to be in the world.
Yeah, maybe it's okay sometimes when you're confronted with fight or flight, it's okay to flight occasionally
Oh
because
yeah, for sure.
you know Pyrrhic victories exists where you achieve it, and it would have been better to not do it at all because you lost so much.
It definitely, because the person that's always approaching is the person that says yes to everything, and they're not the kind of person that really knows what they want, I guess. You know,
Yeah, I'm ready to wrap this up if you are.
I think that was a good 57 minutes of waffle, man. Good day's yapping was done.
Um, I I wanted to ask if you had a. Do you have any advice for Mason who came very close to 100 days, but unfortunately around the 80 period he missed several days? So do you have any advice for him?
Look, Mason, we outlined a proposal. We said if you hit 100 days straight, you can come on the podcast. Very clear. They were clear instructions, clear rules. And I'm afraid you missed the mark. And I think in life, when you put out instructions, you can't then go and change them. So I was looking forward to talking to you. I thought it would have been interesting. It would have been funny. But unfortunately, like, better luck next time, man. You know, you want this to be earned. You want this to be real, don't you? So either start again or find something else to do. But I wish you the
There's
best.
there's another guy called Sam H who I think he's on day 9. So through doing this, we're kind of encouraging other people now to start, which
The
is a bit
first person that gets
dangerous.
to 100 will do, but then it's 1,000 because we can't get anyone on that gets to 100.
Yeah,
You know,
there starts to be a bit where everyone's trying to get 100.
well that's it, and then it goes to 1,000. You gotta progressively overload this shit. But no, I'm sorry. I look forward to talk to you. But one of the principle you have in life is you can't go against your word. If you haven't learned anything new or changed how you feel, you can't go against your word. So
Yeah, because your word has to be worth something. Like you can. It's like truth in it. Like you can separate the complexity of a man from the value of his word.
that's nice, man. That's nice.
Thanks everyone for listening. We'll get some guests on soon.
Yeah, I mean, we should
Um,
probably say that we had a sick guest lined up for this morning, but for complicated book publishing reasons, they couldn't make it and had to. So that's why it's just been me and Jacob for the past few weeks. But good things are on the way.
yeah, and also like it's just everyone was out of office taking their Christmas break. So I've only started getting replies back now from like 3 weeks ago.
Mm.
But yeah, see everyone next time. Thank you very much.